Borneo has been studied for over a century. Biologists have mapped its rivers, catalogued its trees, tracked its orangutans across decades of field research. It is not a blank space on the map, and yet, in Fay, a single 2-year WWF survey of its interior documented Fay species that science had never recorded. A frog that gives birth to live tadpoles, a snake with flame, coloured scales, things that had been living there, undisturbed, while researchers worked around them for generations. Those were the small things, the ones that fit under a microscope or inside a sample jar. There is something else in that forest, something large enough that 3 separate indigenous communities reported it to researchers independently, across 80 kilometers of river, using the same description. It has never been classified, and it is not the strangest creature in this video. By the end, you will understand why Borneo does not have an undiscovered species problem. It has an undiscovered world problem. Borneo is the 3rd largest island on Earth. It covers 743,000 square kilometers, an area larger than France, and most of it has no roads. The interior rises from sea, level mangrove, swamp into cloud forest at over 4,000 meters, and between those two extremes sits one of the most structurally complex ecosystems ever documented. The Mphaya Mountains in the Central Highlands have never had a permanent road cut through them. The only way in is by river, and the rivers narrow into streams long before you reach the zones that matter most. Serious scientific surveying of the interior began in the 1980s, driven largely by alarm over logging rates in the lowland dipterocarp forests. What the early teams found accelerated the effort, but also made clear how much had already been missed. In 2007, 3 nations, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, signed the Heart of Borneo Initiative, formally acknowledging that 220,000 square kilometers of the island's interior remained biologically uncharacterized. Not partially studied, uncharacterized. The logging boundary has moved inward every year since. Field teams working nearest to that boundary have been filing reports about things they cannot identify since at least 1985. Not insects, not plants, large animals repeatedly seen, consistently described, and consistently set aside when the funding ran out and the teams moved on. That pattern is where this video begins. Mystery number 1, the Mahakam River predator. In 1997, a Wildlife Conservation Society team conducting a freshwater biodiversity survey along the upper Mahakam River in East Kalimantan began collecting something they had not planned for. They were there for fish. What they kept getting from 3 separate Dayak communities spread across more than 80 kilometers of river were accounts of a large aquatic predator that none of them had a scientific name for. The Mahakam is not an unstudied river. Scientists have been monitoring it since the early 1980s because of its Irrawaddy dolphin population, one of the most critically threatened freshwater cetacean groups on Earth. Researchers know this water. They know what lives in it. The animal being described was not a false gharial. The false gharials do exist in the lower Mahakam system. It was not a large catfish. The communities describing it, communities with no contact with each other across that 80-kilometer stretch, used consistent language, dark, fast. An ambush predator that targeted large mammals coming to the river's edge. Dutch researcher Dr. Erik Meijard, who was conducting a parallel orangutan range survey in the region, documented the accounts formally. He noted them, he filed them, then the survey ended, and no one went back to follow up. Meijard proposed the animal might represent an unusually large or atypically colored variant of a known species. The Tomistoma population behaving outside its documented range. Reasonable suggestion. The problem is that a confirmed Tomistoma in the upper Mahakam has never been photographed, not once. 3 communities, 80 kilometers apart. The same creature, no photograph, no follow-up expedition. What was living in that river in 1997 has no entry in any scientific record, and that question gets harder to dismiss when you realize the next report did not come from river communities. It came from a trained government ranger. Mystery number 2. The Batang Ai primate sighting in 1994. A Sarawak Forest Department ranger named Hashim Yusuf was running a routine boundary patrol near the Batang Ai National Park in Sarawak, Malaysian Borneo. He had been working that park boundary for 6 years. He knew the forest. He knew what orangutans looked like moving through undergrowth, what they sounded like dropping through the canopy, how they moved on the ground when they came down at all. What he encountered that morning was not an orangutan. Batang Ai is one of the last strongholds of the Bornean orangutan on the Malaysian side of the island. Rangers there are not unfamiliar with large primates at close range. Hashim filed a formal report with the Sarawak Forestry Corporation. That report still exists in their archives. He described a dark-furred primate standing upright, moving bipedally for an estimated 40 meters before disappearing into dense undergrowth. Height, approximately 1.5 meters. Coloration, significantly darker than any Pongo pygmaeus variant he had observed in 6 years of patrols. Primatologists who later reviewed the account proposed the most logical explanation: an adult male orangutan observed in an unusual postural context, possibly a stress-induced gait, possibly a momentary stand. But orangutans do not sustain bipedal locomotion at ground level for 40 meters. That behavior has not been recorded in the behavioral literature for this species. Not before Hashim's report. Not since nobody called him wrong, nobody followed up. A single ranger's account can be questioned. A government report filed in an official archive is harder to set aside. But both of those still depend on human memory, human perception, human error. What happens when the evidence is captured on camera and the footage still cannot be explained? Mystery number 3, the Danum Valley camera trap in 2013. The University of Malaysia Sabah research team was running camera traps through the Danum Valley Conservation Area in Sabah, one of the most intensively monitored old-growth forest reserves in all of Borneo. They were there for orangutans. The cameras had been positioned near known fruiting trees, the kind of sites where large primates return predictably. Standard fieldwork, nothing unusual expected. The one camera retrieved footage that stops the team. Danum Valley is not remote in the way the Mphaya Mountains are remote. The Royal Society has maintained a field research station there since the 1980s. It is one of the most camera-trapped forest environments in Southeast Asia. If something large was moving through that reserve, the assumption had always been that it would have shown up on someone's footage long before 2013. The clip lasted 11 seconds, a large dark figure moving upright through the forest at night. The research team used a tree visible in the frame as a reference marker and estimated the figure's height at between 1.4 and 1.6 meters. It moved fluidly, continuously upright, no drop to all fours at any point across those 11 seconds. The footage was submitted to the Sabah Wildlife Department. Officials suggested the most probable explanation was either an orangutan with a postural abnormality or a sun bear, Helactus malayanus, caught momentarily standing. Sunday bears do stand. They stand to reach food, to investigate a smell, to see over vegetation. They do not sustain full upright bipedal locomotion for 11 seconds without returning to all fours. The University of Malaysia Sabah has never publicly released the footage. No formal classification has been issued. The Sabah Wildlife Department has not commented further. 11 seconds of video. An institution with a field station 30 years old, and no explanation on record. The next creature left behind something more physical than footage, and it is significantly harder to attribute to a known species. Mystery number 4, the gigantic reticulated python of central Kalimantan. In 2003, a logging crew working a concession block near the Borneo River in central Kalimantan captured a reticulated python that stopped work on the site for the rest of the day. Photographs were taken, multiple witnesses were present. The Indonesian government was notified. Plans were announced to transport the animal to a wildlife facility for study. The snake was estimated at over 14 meters in length. It weighed, by the account of the crew foreman, approximately 447 kilograms. Reticulated pythons are the longest snakes on Earth. that is not disputed. The official world record, held by a captive specimen named Medusa, verified by Guinness World Records, stands at 7.67 meters. Large wild specimens in Borneo do exceed 6 meters. 8 meters is considered exceptional but within the documented range. 14 meters is not within any documented range. 14 meters is nearly double the confirmed record. The photographs circulated internationally. Herpetologists who examined them pointed out what field researchers always point out in cases like this. Estimating snake length in the field is genuinely unreliable. A coiled or partially obscured animal looks longer than it is. The 2003 specimen, they suggested, was likely a very large individual in the 8 to 9 meter range, misestimated in the chaos of an unexpected capture. That explanation is reasonable, up to a point. Several of the photographs show the snake stretched alongside human figures. The scale relationship in at least 2 of those images is not consistent with an 8-meter animal. The animal disappeared. The wildlife facility transfer never happened. The forestry officials who filed the initial documentation were later unable to produce follow-up records. No scientist ever examined the specimen. No measurements were taken under controlled conditions. A snake that size, if real, would have been the most significant herpetological discovery in a century. It is gone. The paperwork is gone with it. What remained in that forest after the logging crew left is a question nobody has formally gone back to ask. But the next mystery was not captured by a logging crew, and it was not documented in a government report. It was recorded by a man who spent 6 years living inside the forest itself. Mystery number 5. The Penan accounts of the Ngaran Bruno Mansa arrived in the Borneo interior. In 1984, he was a Swiss ethnobotanist, not an adventurer, not a journalist, and he spent the next 6 years living with the Penan people in the forests of Sarawak, not visiting, living. He learned the language. He documented the plants, the animals, the ecological knowledge that the Penan had accumulated across generations of continuous forest habitation. The Penan are not a community whose environmental knowledge has been dismissed by science. Their plant classifications have led to pharmaceutical discoveries. Their animal identifications, when researchers have gone back to verify them, have matched known species with the consistency that has impressed field biologists for decades. When the Penan identifies something, it is worth writing down. Mansa wrote it down. Across 6 years and multiple Penan communities, he documented consistent accounts of a creature they called the Yanakan, large nocturnal, a canopy animal that moved through the upper forest silently at night. The accounts described eyes that reflected no light or no visible eyes at all, and a sound the Penan did not classify as a vocalization, not a call, not a cry, a sustained low-frequency vibration that communities across separate river catchments described in identical terms. The descriptions were not gathered from one village. They came from Penan groups separated by significant distances with limited contact between them. The consistency across those groups is what made Mansa take it seriously. Ethnobiologists have proposed candidate species, the sunder flying lemur, the sunder slow loris under unusual conditions. Neither produces low-frequency, sustained vibrations. Neither moves through the canopy in the pattern the Penan described. Bruno Mansa disappeared in the Borneo interior in 2000. His field notes were recovered. The Yangaran documentation was among them. No researcher has returned to pursue that specific thread. 6 years of recorded accounts from one of the most ecologically literate communities on Earth. A creature with no candidate species, and the man who documented it most carefully never came back out. What comes next is not a single sighting or a single set of field notes. It is something that has been accumulating for 40 years. And it changes the way every mystery in this video needs to be read. Everything covered so far has a gap in it. A missing follow-up, a report filed and set aside, a photograph that raises more questions than it answers. Each one, taken alone, can be explained away. What cannot be explained away is the pattern. From 1985 to the present, reports of large, upright, moving, unclassified primates from the interior of Borneo have been documented by at least 11 independent researchers, 4 separate government forest departments, and dozens of indigenous community accounts spread across Sarawak, Sabah, and Kalimantan. These are not connected reports. They do not reference each other. They emerge from different river systems, different elevations, different decades, and they describe the same thing. In 1974, before most of these accounts existed, British naturalist John Mackinnon was conducting what would become the most comprehensive survey of Borneo's interior fauna attempted up to that point. Working near the Crocker Range in Sabah, his team recorded a set of large unidentified footprints in highland forest that Mackinnon could not attribute to any known species. He published the finding in the journal Oryx. It was noted. It was discussed briefly. Then the scientific community moved on. Mackinnon's footprint measurements have never been formally reanalyzed. Until 2018, when Dr. John Meares of Leiden University reviewed the accumulated bipedal reports from across Borneo's interior and proposed something that most researchers had avoided putting in writing. He suggested the sightings may represent a relict population of Gigantopithecus blacki, the largest primate that ever lived, standing an estimated 3 meters tall. Believed to have gone extinct, the Meares was careful. He framed it as hypothesis only. One possibility among several but the footprint measurements Mackinnon recorded in 1974 fall within the estimated foot size range of a juvenile Gigantopithecus individual. Gigantopithecus is known only from fossilized teeth and jaw fragments. No complete skeleton has ever been recovered, no soft tissue, no hair, nothing that would allow a definitive biological comparison with a living animal, which means there is no way to rule it out. If something has been moving through the Borneo interior for 300,000 years without being formally documented, surviving the ice ages, surviving the sea level changes that periodically reconnected Borneo to the Asian mainland, surviving a century of scientific expeditions that passed through the edges of its range and never quite reached the center, then what we know about this forest is not incomplete. It is a different kind of wrong altogether. Every case in this video shares one feature that has nothing to do with the creatures themselves. The evidence exists, the witnesses exist, the reports exist, and then the funding ends, the team moves on, and the question gets filed somewhere. It will not inconvenience anyone. Not disproven, filed Borneo is not unexplored because no one has gone there. It is unexplored because the parts that matter most are the hardest to reach, and the science has consistently stopped just short of them. What these creatures represent, if they are real, if even one of them is real, is not a gap in a species list. It is a reminder that the oldest rainforest on Earth has been here for 140 million years. We have been looking at it seriously for about 40.